It's finally time to say hello to an old friend. Back in 2015, I declared that The Witcher 3 was the best game that I had ever personally played. Not just because of the quality of the game itself, but because of how carefully it treated the source content and how everything just came together almost perfectly. What a great ending to the trilogy that game was. It was incredible, and I think to this day, it's still my favorite game of all time. At long last, back in December, CD Projekt Red finally released the next-gen edition of The Witcher 3, The Witcher 3 Enhanced Edition. Besides some sparkly ray-traced goodies on top of the game, it also has some new quests, a number of new weapons, and tons of slight improvements to the game like new player camera angles and combat rebalances. It also integrates a bunch of community favorite mods, carefully handpicked by CDPR and added to both console and PC versions, and also fixes a ton of bugs and honestly very nitpicky small issues from the original games. Some of these updates do come at a pretty steep cost though, so besides playing some of the new questline here in this video, I want to show you guys some of the new visual features, and we're going to look at what those features do cost you as far as frame rate and stability goes. First things first though, as you might expect, this game, now that it has ray tracing features, is going to be pushing my PC to its limits. My PC is only 1 year old, and it was built last January, by the sponsor of this video, Apex Gaming PCs. I'm still running my AMD Ryzen 9 5900X, that's a 12-core CPU. I have upgraded to 64 gigs of memory, all of which is slightly overclocked, and I'm still running my 3080 Ti graphics card. This Witcher 3 Enhanced Edition, as well as Cyberpunk 2077, have really been the only two games that really pushed this PC to its absolute limits and required the use of DLSS scaling if I wanted to really crank the ray tracing features all the way up. If you guys like what you see in this video and you're feeling left out of the ray tracing train, now is a good time to get on board. It's quite clear at this point that ray tracing is not a fad, and some of the high-end features like global illumination are not only here to stay, but also, I think, the future of how game engines are going to render things. Don't forget, Stalker 2 coming out hopefully this year is going to be one of the first totally ray-traced open-world games. But if you guys are feeling left out, make sure you check out the sponsor of this video, longtime channel partner Apex Gaming PCs, where you can use code RangerDave to save up to $250 off of your total purchase price. There's 3 different configurations there that I've helped spec out that are going to be awesome at ray tracing and a lot of the games that you see here on the channel. So next up, let's talk about why you need all of this high-end hardware to get the most out of a ray-traced game like The Witcher 3 now is. In the complete edition here of The Witcher 3, the entire lighting system has been overhauled for a global illumination solution. I'm going to try and simplify the concept of global illumination here without butchering it, so just bear with me, but global illumination allows the creators of a game to ditch a lot of the hacky solutions to creating lighting in games. A lot of the tricks of the trade for faking good lighting can be tossed away because global illumination does a much better job of simulating how actual light bounces and lights up a scene. Not only is this easier on artists when they're trying to create a nice, realistic looking scene, but overall, global illumination is always going to look more convincing because it's much more correct as far as real-world lighting conditions go. The biggest change to how global illumination works is that the light actually bounces around the scene. In traditional game lighting, the light comes from the source, like the sun or a torch, for example. It hits the object being lit, and that's that. Whatever type of lighting made it from the source to that object, that's how that object is lit. By bouncing light around the scene for a deeper calculation, yes, it is more expensive, but you're going to get a much more realistic picture because areas that are more in darkness are shadowed more realistically because the light bounces and actually runs out before it gets to those dark corners and crevices. And other areas are actually lit more as the light bounces in a more natural way, for example, off of a more reflective surface. It actually adds more illumination to maybe the back side of an object that in a more direct illumination render style just wouldn't be lit up at all. Let's not get too lost in the weeds here. How this works in The Witcher 3 is especially noticeable when you're in a bright, vibrant area of the map, for example, basically anywhere in Toussaint. As you're traveling through the narrow alleyways and main streets of the cities in Toussaint, you're going to see these colorfully painted buildings bouncing light onto your character and onto each other in ways that are just shockingly realistic. Stand next to a blue house, and the shrubbery and planters around it are going to have a blue tint being bounced off of that bright blue paint. Geralt and other characters are also going to be shaded with this bounced blue light. At the same time, if you walk underneath a overhang or walkway, areas that the light might have actually been clipping through in a more direct illumination render style, causing the objects to look kind of grayed out and flat, are now in a global illumination render style, much more realistically shadowed. Now, the base version of Witcher 3 had a pretty great ambient occlusion solution. That's a way to fake those contact shadows in dark crevices, and it really made the grass pop, especially. The base version of the game had some excellent looking foliage, especially up close to the camera, all those grass clumps having some really nice ambient occlusion shadows there. But here in the global illumination renderer, the ambient occlusion is far more accurate because it's actually self-shadowing versus a faked effect being added on top of the renderer. The Witcher 3 Complete Edition also offers real-time ray trace reflections, which is a feature that a lot of ray trace games have been dropping in recent years. But unfortunately here in The Witcher 3, the ray traced reflection solution is really, really glitchy. At times, especially on large bodies of water, it can look great, absolutely amazing. Other times, especially on, for example, small creeks and rivers where the water is flowing quite quickly, the ray trace reflections not only look terrible, but actually just look straight up broken. The ray trace reflections appear to be floating on top of the animated water texture for these flowing streams, and the reflection is almost completely static. Sure, a tree blowing in the wind might be accurately reflected into the creek, but that reflected surface takes into account none of the animation or flow of the water surface at all. So it's like looking at a mirror being held over top of a creek. It just really does not look good in some cases, and in other cases I actually found quite a few artifacts going on with the water. Hopefully CD Projekt Red is going to revisit some of these smaller creeks and rivers and the overall solution for the ray traced reflections and make them look better, because when it does work, it does look really, really good. And again, part of the issue is just that the base game had really, really good screen space faked reflections. Toussaint especially looked incredible, and when I first turned the ray tracing reflections on, I had a hard time telling the difference until I looked really closely. That brings me to kind of the summary of the ray traced section here, and that's what it's going to cost you as far as performance and overall game stability goes. And unfortunately, it takes a huge chunk out of your performance for these features. I'm not sure how much of this drop in performance is because of this particular implementation of global illumination and ray tracing, where it's kind of been tacked onto the engine, or if it's just because the game is trying to do these simulations so accurately at such a high draw distance that it's just trying too hard. Maybe it's hard for me to tell which is the bigger issue here, but you're going to see a probably, I would say, over 60% drop in performance compared to the last version of the game if you turn on all of the ray tracing features. And that's with a top, current, or last gen ray tracing graphics card. And that was just hugely disappointing for me at first. I had gotten so used to a locked 60 FPS in the game that seeing it stutter and struggle from 30 to 60 as I traveled around was just very unexpected. Thankfully, as an additional option with a new card, you can also turn on DLSS. That's the deep learning resampling option, which will scale the image down a bit and then rescale it so that your graphics card is having to work a little bit less. And yes, you do have a clarity loss as you are looking at a smaller rendered image, but DLSS remains some basically dark magic to me. It is incredibly surprising how well DLSS can scale a smaller res image and make it look really, really good compared to previous games who have tried their own internal scaled renderer. You see this all the time in console games, for example, where they're trying to hit a FPS target and the image is scaled down and then scaled back up. It tends to be quite noticeable with a lack of sharpness and maybe some artifacts in that case, but DLSS here in The Witcher 3 Complete Edition really continues to impress. I only noticed a couple of instances of, really fuzzy tree branches where it stood out to me as, okay, this is a smaller scaled image that's being scaled back up. In most cases, as I was even exploring slowly, it was quite hard to tell that I was leaning so heavily on DLSS to get a playable frame rate. Even then, I had a huge range of frame rates from the mid to low 30s all the way up to a locked 60 at times with the exact same settings. As you can see right here, I've got all the ray tracing options on, and then just a couple of things turned down a little bit. The PC version does have a Ultra Plus graphics option, but playing all of this at 4K is really punishing on my system as it is, so I am definitely leaning on DLSS for that playable frame rate. And I apologize here because a lot of my footage is missing the frame rate counter. I didn't realize until I was almost done recording all my footage that my overlay had not been saved onto the footage in most cases. Here's a few clips here. As you can see, the frame rate is definitely not locked 60 or even close to 60 most of the time, but it remains very playable. And I think having played a bit with all of these beautiful ray tracing settings on, I am going to keep them on and enjoy the game how it looks. I've almost finished, every question mark out there. There's not much for me to do, so most of what I'm doing is going to be slow walking around and staring at things. So a locked FPS matters a little bit less to me right now than it would somebody who is just starting off at the start of the main quest, for example. The choice between a stable frame rate and all of these shiny new features is going to be different for everyone though. I just really hope that CDPR comes out with more improvements, fixes some of these glitches, and really gets this thing running smoothly. A couple of final notes on the visuals. All versions of the game have a greater draw distance now, and that is especially noticeable here on PC where you can do the Ultra Plus draw distance, and the clumps of grass and small bushes just render out so far. The game looks incredible in motion and also makes for some incredible screenshots as well. It's one of those, didn't realize how bad the pop-in was in the base version of the game until it was improved on, and now it just looks really good. Also, a big thumbs up for the additional shading and shadows on distant trees, those flat 2D billboard trees that are used to fill out far distant forests. They look much better in this version. I wish I had a complete side-by-side comparison here, but just look at those background trees and the amount of shading and effects applied to them. This game has never looked better, even at distance. And of course, as you're going to see here and there are still some artifacts with this global illumination solution where something about the combination of all the effects they're applying and things like the old NVIDIA Hairwork system, which still looks pretty awesome by the way, all those things stacked up just gives you a little bit of flicker and hitching occasionally. I saw some jumping shadows and some black artifact boxes flickering now and again. It's a bit distracting, but rare enough that I don't think it detracts too much from the overall ray traced experience. Again though, that's going to be a different call for everybody. The game also comes with a new, very long quest line. I was originally planning to play some of it in this video, but it was almost an hour of exploring and unlocking stuff for me, so I'm going to let you guys explore that on your own. You've seen just a bit of it here in the background footage, but color me impressed. That was a lot more content than I was actually expecting for a mostly visual update. So there you guys have it, The Witcher 3 Complete Edition, bringing a lot of new stuff to the table and just taking a chunk out of your power bill in exchange for it. Final impressions for me is I have finally accepted the frame rate drop in exchange for the visual upgrade. At first, like I said, missing that 60 FPS lock hurt a lot worse than I was expecting. But as I've explored around and really come to appreciate these new lighting solutions and the further draw distances and all of this just coming together to make the already incredible looking game look even better, I think I'm going to deal with that FPS hit and hope for patches, because this game has just never looked better. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.